leading international scholars to share their perspectives, ideas, and research experience in public administration and public sector accounting. Our guest speaker today is Professor Ileana Steccolini, a leading scholar in public sector accounting and a dear friend. She has published in prestigious journals. Ileana is professor of accounting at Essex Business School and professor of accounting and public management in Università di Bologna. She is also editor of Financial Accountability and Management Journal and the current president of the International Research Society of Public Management. Well, today we will talk about the paper published, What Counts as Good Qualitative Accounting Research. We will have about 20 minutes presentation or just a warm-up, and then we will open a conversation about the topic. Ileana, thank you so much to have accepted our invitation. And please, the floor is yours, and we are very lucky to have you here.
Thank you really for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be with you all, and I think, well, I feel like I am like among many friends because I can recognize many names, either because we have met somewhere or rather because sometimes I read about the great things that you do. Sometimes we are in contact through LinkedIn, social media. And of course, it's really, really a pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss issues that I think that we care about as a community. So really, thank you for this invitation. I will now start sharing my screen. And of course, I have been asked to present this paper. So I will just provide a little bit of a context to it. And then, of course, it's quite a long paper, but I will try to present just the main aspects. And then I will be happy, of course, to discuss things further with you. Well, this is a paper which comes a little bit like as a result of a, let's say, there is someone who is to blame probably for this paper. And I think that someone is Lee Parker. I received an email one day saying, listen, I am launching this thought leadership series, the Apira Thought Leadership series. Perhaps you are also aware of this, and this is going on and it is continuing. But that was the first year where Lee Parker was launching this. And they said, well, I want you and Brendan O'Dwyer to do this thought leadership event around critical issues in qualitative research. And I said, wow, sounds great. And then I started to reflect on this and look, of course, at what people around us were also writing and reflecting upon in this area. And then I really realized something that really struck me, which is that actually there are many conceptual contributions about how, for example, we assess qualitative research. So there are many contributions saying, in theory, how we should be assessing our qualitative accounting research. But then what I have realized is that I was expecting more empirical studies on this, more studies telling us, okay, what are the real experiences of people with assessing research when reading papers and saying, oh, this is good, or this is bad, or this is so and so. And then I realized there were not so many reflections on this. There was something written about what papers did in this respect, what papers contained in terms of explanations about methods. But then there was a little bit of a desert as far as reflecting on the experiences of people with the assessment of their own and others' research. And so I decided that probably this may deserve more attention also in terms of looking at the direct experiences of, well, of us, of our colleagues or scholars. And I thought that it was probably time to interviewing people and understand how they felt about the ways in which every day their research comes to be assessed, for example, because they submit projects and those projects are evaluated, or because they submit papers and those papers undergo, of course, review processes, for example, or friendly reviews by colleagues. And then on the other hand, it was also worth understanding better what people do and how they feel when they are assessing research, when they are, for example, the reviewers of a project or a paper. And this was very much, let's say, the impetus for doing this, for starting to work into this kind of project in a way. But again, let me repeat this. The person who is to blame for this is definitely Lee Parker. He always manages to throw and, let's say, bring in new stimuli, and then you realize that there is space also for looking at things from new perspectives in new ways. So in short, well, you will find many more details on the conceptual contributions about existing, for example, criteria for assessing qualitative research. But I will not discuss here all of the literature, which you can find in the paper, of course. What I would like to point out, however, is that that literature is not necessarily so consolidated or so convergent towards the same criteria. And in this is quite different from quantitative, let's say, research in accounting. Let's say that in general, in quantitative research, what counts as good research is much more, let's say, much clearer and more established. And what emerges also by looking at the literature is that there is really a multiplicity of criteria which over the years have been added, discussed, changed, and in a way they are less established, they are very variable, and also it has been shown by Keane and Inhantola, who have worked on a specific analysis of 10 years of management accounting papers, specifically looking at their method section, and they realize that actually there is a lot of diversity in the ways in which authors justify and explain their research methods in the qualitative arena. Okay, so this is a little bit the starting point for this paper. What happened when I started to look into this is that it was still the time when there was COVID around. I'm not saying that COVID is no longer around now, but at the time, basically, we were not allowed to even interview people in person. So since I wanted to understand the concrete experiences of colleagues in assessing their own research and other people's research, I had to conduct interviews via Zoom. And actually, well, this was also a good opportunity actually to have the possibility of contacting also colleagues in different countries. However, I must admit that I focused in specific countries where I had probably more access to people I know. And then at the same time, this means that, for example, there is still space for exploring many other countries, many other traditions, perhaps, which are not represented in this paper. This is something that I really want to highlight because I think there may be a need to continue reflecting on this in the future. So here you can see the list, for example, of the country I considered. And you may want to also take into consideration that, however, this does not reflect necessarily the ethnicity of the researchers I interviewed, because of course, some of them, even if they are in Germany, the UK, Italy, or Spain, or Australia, they may also be of different country of origins. In any case, for example, I don't have voices from, for example, Nordic countries, and I don't think I have many voices, for example, from South America, apart probably from a couple of them, okay? So for sure, this could be one area where it could be nice to hear more, to know more in the future. Having said this, I will probably skip all of the further details about the methods that I adopted. What I wanted to highlight really is that I focused on people who were at the mid and early stage of their careers, because my thought was, we know quite well what editors and senior people think about this. They are always somewhere speaking at conferences, at events, and they write a lot about this. But then sometimes we do not hear the voices, especially of those people for which actually quality assessment may really still make a lot of difference in terms of career and promotion. So I really wanted to go and hear a little bit more about those unheard voices. And in doing this, I embraced a thematic analysis made in 2 steps, one which had more to do with identifying main themes from the interviews, and then trying to aggregate those themes through a process of seeking saturation. But then after this, I looked back at the interviews by considering this skeleton, and I tried to add new flesh to this skeleton by trying also to give, again, voice to and more perspectives into the whole picture, and then trying to do what could be termed a crystallization in terms of, let's say, amplifying, let's say, voices and diversity of those voices. Well, what emerged mostly from the interviews, let's say in very basic terms and in very, let's say, general terms, is that all of the interviewees felt that in our field, in the field of qualitative accounting research, criteria for assessing research are for sure very plural, very uncertain, and especially for the early career researchers, this was seen as quite unsettling. They felt that in a way, there was no clear convergence towards certain criteria like we could have with quantitative research. And this left them sometimes in having a sense of vagueness of the qualitative work. At the same time, when they were asked to be, let's say, to specify which are the main things, the main criteria that they follow when looking at the paper, for example, or understanding whether their own papers are strong or not, well, they didn't use necessarily specific words which we would find in handbooks. They rather described their processes through which they understand whether a paper is good or not. And then we could, well, in a way, in the process of aggregation, I could then bring the various concepts that they discussed to, let's say, 3 main areas. One has to do with the contribution of the paper. The other one has to do with the overall consistency of the paper. And the third one has to do with the confidence that the reader can have in a certain paper. Much less reference was made to the issue of whether research should be generalizable or not. This is the 4th, let's say, main theme, which was anyway less addressed in the interviews. This is just to give you an idea, so I don't want to discuss this table at length, but this is just to give you an idea about, well, in a way, going from right to left, on the right hand side, you can see the more detailed list of critical issues that emerged in the interviews, and then how they were aggregated into sub-dimensions of quality research, and then how those sub-dimensions became then and could be brought back to the main dimensions, which could also be linked to the relevant literature. So now what I will try to do is to give you a little bit of an idea of what emerged as critical issues in those 4 areas that I have identified. And of course, let me say that it was very difficult to try and combine, let's say, this synthesis, but then at the same time also try to give as much, let's say, as possible voice to the people who contributed, of course, to these interviews. And I would say that, as opposed to, just to share with you my experience, as opposed to other papers where I gave preeminence to the saturation of concepts. So I gave really preeminence to simplifying as much as possible, going from the interviews to back to the concepts. I would say that in this paper, I tried to do something different, which was more like giving this idea of also of the multiplicity and plurality of voices that I have heard. And of course, some reviewers were very happy about this. Another reviewer was like, oh, too many things. Okay, this is the typical experience that we all have, right? But yeah, I think one reviewer was more like, well, that's it. You tried to do something original in trying to write this. And of course I tried, because this, well, for me, there was the inspiration coming from the interviews of the colleagues, and I really wanted to make sure that their voices could be heard. But okay, this is a little bit also to provide you the background where basically in the paper, sometimes you also live what you have been asking during the interviews, which is quite interesting. Anyway, so what emerged about the contribution? People were generally agreed on the fact that the first things they look in a qualitative accounting paper is they want to see the contribution. And actually, when they describe what they meant by this, they were saying things along the lines of, you know, a paper should challenge the domain assumption, or they should at least challenge, you know, the common understanding of a phenomenon. Basically, I should see in a paper something that I haven't seen somewhere else already. Okay. And I think this was quite a very strong requirement, and something that probably makes this field different from quantitative research, where people tend perhaps to look more at the methods rather than the strength of the novelty of the contribution. The other thing that then, going in more detail, which emerged quite strongly, is that only some people were interested in a contribution to practice and policy. So a colleague, for example, was really much about, you know, contribution is central, because honestly, if I use Weber or Marx or Bourdieu, what I want to do is not using Weber, Marx or Bourdieu, but making real change for the workers in Bangladesh. So this is, you know, this was quite a strong stance. But then most of the others were completely in a, let's say, different planet. They were suggesting that actually they see contribution to theories or literature as a stronger requirement than contribution to practice. Basically, if there is no contribution to practice, a paper could be accepted anyway. But if there is no contribution to theory or literature, then this becomes a little bit more complicated. The other thing that was quite intriguing for me in discussing with people was this idea that actually people felt that in the qualitative community, there is a little bit of fixation with theories. So people are really looking for theories. Have you ever noticed that when we attend a qualitative accounting presentation, if the presentation lasts 1 hour, 50 minutes are taken by the description of a theory, and then 10 minutes from the empirics. And then people were complaining about this. They were saying, you know, we become so fixated with theory that we completely forget about the empirics. Or they were even adding something even more serious. They were saying, actually, what happens in some cases is that we are forced to pick a theory, because this is a way in which in our community we signal what we stand for, who our friends are, which tribe we belong to. So they were suggesting that actually in some journals you should use certain theories or it is difficult to get accepted. And they even reported of, let's say, senior colleagues advising them to change theory because that theory would be better accepted in the community. And of course, they were also highlighting the fact that this may also go against innovation. So if I am required to follow a certain theory, because this is the theory that is preferred by a community, then this means that I may then try to avoid picking new theories, new conceptual lenses. And this was seen as a serious issue. At the same time, people were pointing to another limit of our papers in a way. And the limit has to do with the fact that vice versa, they didn't see much engagement sometimes with the literature. And by literature, I mean, for example, empirical papers, papers which applying a certain theory add something by providing evidence on how then certain theories hold or do not hold in a certain area. People were highlighting the fact that sometimes our focus on theories and explaining in general the theory then detract from our focus on all of the papers which have already addressed a certain topic. And again, they felt that actually we should be more serious about acknowledging whether there is literature on a certain topic. There is no point in saying, oh, there is nothing written about this in the accounting literature, if then there is a lot written about this in the sociological or the organizational or the public administration literature. Okay, so this is just an excuse not to look further into the literature. And this is something that people were quite critical about. The other, as I said, the other criterion that people felt was very important in understanding the quality of research was consistency. And consistency, of course, is a very wide umbrella. It has to do with more generally how much a paper, how much a research keeps its promises. That's it. That's consistency. Basically, I wanted to do this. I had a certain research question, and through my research, I am answering those questions. Seems quite easy, but actually we know that sometimes there is a certain misalignment between what we promise to do and then the methods we adopt and then the results we get. And so basically people said, well, basically I would prefer a paper with limited ambitions, but then with the methods and the results which are very consistent with those ambitions, rather than a very ambitious paper which then goes completely in a very strange and completely unexpected direction, which has nothing to do with the initial promises. This was very much this concept of consistency. And then people identified a number of ways in which then they could really practice consistency in their day-by-day writing of research. For example, by picking the right unit of analysis. Sometimes we think that we are developing a paper on a case, but that actually the paper is not about a case. Perhaps it's more about a certain process of change? Or is the paper about an organization or about the story of an individual? Well, sometimes people felt that sometimes authors in a paper promise to focus on individuals and then tell the story of a process, or vice versa. So again, picking the right unit of analysis was seen as an important element of consistency. And of course, this is also related with sampling. For example, promising to look at vulnerable people and then only interviewing powerful people is not a sign of consistency. People also felt that in practicing consistency, we often face trade-offs. For example, we are sometimes very fixated with saturation. Oh, yes, we look for saturation. We need to confirm. Yes, but the more we look for confirmation, and the more we may be biased and try to avoid those results which are not confirming, are not saturating, but rather providing counter evidence or different evidence which we need to explore. And this was quite an interesting point made by some colleagues. I would say that in trying also to signal this importance of trade-offs, several colleagues highlighted the role of contextualization as an important way to find a compromise. Basically, they were saying, you know, sometimes to practice consistency, to make sure that people understand how you decided about trade-offs and different possibilities of research, I contextualize, I explain the context for the research, I explain why certain choices were needed. And this was, according to them, a good way to make, for example, the research more accepted. Well, they also pointed, however, to another aspect of consistency, which I would say is more about consistency not being just a technical thing, not just being a, let's say, black or white kind of thing, but consistency also being the result of social processes and the result very much of a dialogue between the, let's say, the author of a certain research and the audience for those research. And they pointed to the importance of, in qualitative research, of the use of words rather than figures, for example, in being convincing about the plausibility of the research, of the methods, and of the results. So basically, this really highlighted the social nature of research and the social nature of research assessment. Consistency is not necessarily an objective thing. It's also the result of the interaction between the author of the research and the audience. And of course, this connects and links back to the third aspect that emerged, the third criterion for research assessment that people identified, and which let's say I put under this umbrella term of confidence. People highlighted that they want to feel confident about research. And this had to do with, say, three main aspects. One had to do with the richness of data. Why conducting interviews to provide then quotes and evidence about them? The keeping of an audit trail, so keeping track of everything that was done and providing evidence of this. And the third aspect had to do with the honesty, which was used in accounting for the research process. And this honesty thing was particularly critical because people identified a few instances where, of course, honesty was also difficult to perform and to translate in practice. And in particular, they pointed to the fact that sometimes to build confidence, people may end up, let's say, not accounting properly for how the analysis was conducted. People realize that sometimes authors of papers, for example, tend to rationalize ex post about the overall analysis process without explaining in more detail how actually the analysis was a messy and complicated process with a lot of back and forth and a lot of messiness. So many people pointed to the fact that in qualitative research, this messiness is important even for the discovery of new phenomena, the so-called serendipity of research. But then we tend not to be so open about this. And they felt actually we should be more open. But then they were also saying, actually, the reality of this is that we are afraid of being open about what happened really in the process. And sometimes we just try to write what others may expect from us. So what others have already written about this. We rationalize ex post what happened rather than explain what actually happened. And we use signaling tactics we do a little bit of magic sometimes, saying, you know, I use the word saturation, triangulation, 80 interviews, and then I think that's it. I think that's the way to do this. The final point, which I would like to highlight, is the fact that actually not many people discuss the generalizability of research. This was probably the area where people felt less comfortable. Some people felt that it is really difficult, and some others felt that it's not even something that they were trying to do, for example, in their research. So generalizability emerged really as a little bit of a Cinderella among the criteria, rather than being at the center of the research process. So to wrap up a little bit, I think in looking back at the results of the interviews, I have personally two different interpretations of this, and perhaps those two interpretations are not necessarily alternative, they may be complementary. On the one hand, the interviews confirm that there is a plurality of ways of assessing qualitative research. And this suggests that actually we may live in a democratic, a pluralistic world, where actually people are open to listen to what we have done, the choices that we have made, and people are open to start a dialogue about how to assess research in a very open way, and ensuring there is this focus on the contribution, the consistency, and honesty. But then there is also an alternative or complementary interpretation of the interviews. And this has to do with the fact that people did not exclude the existence of more a tribal world where people do a lot of things because there are ceremonials to be followed, and there are theories to be complied with, or there are methods of even writing the research methods section of papers, which are seen as giving a higher return in terms of acceptance. So in a way, I think probably these interviews suggest that we live a little bit in this pluralistic world, but also there are also elements of the tribal world which may also go against, for example, innovation or full inclusion of new ideas in, let's say, in our community. And well, my final reflection is how we can then ensure that there is real pluralism in our research, how we can ensure that there is real acceptance and dialogue around the ways in which, for example, we collect data, but also analyze them, theorize about them. In what I would like to highlight here is that we may need not only to preach pluralism, but also to practice it more consistently and without fear, because the more actually we all practice real pluralism, and the more, in a way, the tribal word will go back, and we will probably be more, let's say, moving more towards this plural and more democratic, let's say, research word. And in doing this, we also need to consider that there is not necessarily always this, let's say, monodirectional relationship between epistemology and methodology. There are many people doing qualitative research in positivistic ways, and there are still other people doing even quantitative research from interpretive perspectives. The point is being open and understanding what the others are doing, just rather than just relying on stereotypes or prejudices about what we expect to read in a paper. Let's try to listen to the authors rather than prejudge them just based on what we read on the tin of the paper. And this is my closing sentence. I will stop here because I want to hear your voices now.
Okay, thank you very much, Ileana, for your presentation of this paper. We already have one question here that Beatriz Morgan wrote on the chat. I don't know if Beatriz, if you want to open the microphone and ask, or if you wish, basically, that Ileana and I, we just read this. I may just... Oh yeah, Beatriz is here. Hello, Beatriz. You can open the microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Because I'm not in very good computer right now. Is Ileana, né? Ileana, sorry, I'm not sure if it's a L or
Ileana.
Yes, Ileana, yes.
Ileana. Okay, Ileana, I would like to ask you about the honest issue, to hear from you a little bit more. My question is related to the difference between countries, cultures. If you realize that one country show more trustful in qualitative research than others. In other words, if they trust more in researchers than other countries, other cultures. It is, in this sense, my question. If you can say, if you realize something or data.
Well, I think your question is really, in a way, multifaceted, because for sure it is true that people can think differently about honesty. For example, just to give you an idea, in certain countries, there is this fixation with ethical processes. So basically, every project needs to have an ethical approval, and this is a stamp that the project has. And then people can claim that having this ethical approval, then their research is strong. But then in other countries, this is not happening, right? Because it's not required, for example, by universities. And then I see a paradox here. The paradox here is that then people in countries where this is not necessarily the case, this does not mean necessarily that they are not following good standards for research. It's just that they don't have the stamp from their institution because this is not what is required in their institution. But then this means that they will find sometimes more difficult for their research to get accepted. Or, for example, as you were suggesting, and this is one angle of this. So the fact that sometimes, the formality of a process is seen as a sign of honesty, but actually there is much more than this, because it's not necessarily that stamp that tells everything about the process. And this is why many colleagues were actually highlighting the importance of explaining the process, for example, in the method section. But then I think you also highlight a different matter too. The fact that, for example, there are people, well, I think I have heard this at various events and conferences. You know, there are people who, for example, have a quantitative approach in their research, and they will think that qualitative research is, for them, it's not serious because they don't see this clear-cut kind of thing. They don't see the black or white in their research because they see the nuances that emerge in qualitative research. And they feel very uncomfortable about this. And then automatically, the fact that qualitative research looks at the nuances, at the subjective aspects, for example, of things, then they will label this as not being serious, or they cannot understand how then we can be so sure about the claims that we discuss in our discussions or in our conclusion. And this is a very serious allegation against qualitative research. I have seen this happening very often. And of course, this is something that it is very difficult to fight because in a way, it's based on some stereotypes and prejudices rather than on the willingness to really engage with the qualitative community. And then what happened is that as a reaction, sometimes this is the reason why people in the qualitative research arena have tried to adopt sometimes the same, you know, validity, reliability words that quantitative researchers are using. But is this the solution? Because then if you just end up feeling so pressured by them that you end up using their criteria for assessing your research, well, honestly, can I use this comparison? It's like, you know, it's like asking to compare Italian cuisine and Brazilian cuisine, and then applying the same criteria that you would use to evaluate Italian cuisine to the Brazilian one, or vice versa. Or think about Chinese and Italian cuisine. Would you use the same criteria to evaluate that? You can't. They use different recipes, different traditions. Okay, they both have spaghetti noodles, but they use this in different ways, right? So the point is, if you restrict your possibilities by embracing their criteria, it will be then using their rules of the game. By definition, it will be a lost battle. So I think it is very important not to accept this kind of, sorry, I become very passionate about the things, but I have seen this all of my life. And it's not about honesty. It's about recognizing that you need different ways of assessing research. And sometimes we are killing ourselves by accepting to be evaluated by other standards than the ones that we should be using. I hope this makes sense to you, Beatrice.
Yes, interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Beatrice. I can see, Fabrício, that you raised your hands, but Ariel typed a question before, so I will see if Ariel, do you want to open the microphone, or you wish me to just read the question that you made, just to be sure? Okay, Ariel says that I can read what he wrote. Basically, Ileana, Ariel sent a message saying congratulations for your presentation, saying that the paper is very helpful to introduce novel academics to these parameters for qualitative research. And then Ariel makes a question. He would like to know if, Ileana, if you understand that there are some journals that are more adept of the qualitative research in accounting, and which one those journals are, basically.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ariel. Of course, that's a very, well, this question makes a lot of sense because in a way, my experience is that it doesn't make sometimes sense to send a qualitative paper to a journal where there is no attention to qualitative research. We will end up just having the paper rejected with very strange excuses sometimes. But I think the point is that there are various accounting journals which are really open towards qualitative research. I would say that some of them even publish more qualitative and quantitative research. So if you think about Accounting, Auditing and Accountability Journal, which is where I published this paper, it is not by chance that, of course, this paper is published here, because a lot of the reflection about qualitative research is also there. There is a methodology reflection section in that journal where even contribution about interdisciplinary and qualitative research are published. So this is an example, but for sure, if you think also about, for example, critical perspectives on accounting, this is another journal where there is a lot of openness towards qualitative research. Of course, in this case, more taking even a critical stance. So even, let's say, a stance that has more to do with transforming the world in a way. But definitely, this is another journal of that type. I would say that then there are various other journals which are very much open to qualitative research, which are more specialized. I would say that, for example, the journal I am editor for, Financial Accountability and Management, it's specifically focused on, let's say, public sector accounting, public sector financial management, public sector reform. But again, in our journal, we give a lot of, let's say, attention to good qualitative research. And we are very careful on the other side, not just to publish some quantitative research which tells nothing new. If we are very careful about, let's say, not publishing very, let's say, kind of replicating kind of studies in quantitative research. On the other hand, we are very, very keen on publishing good qualitative research for sure. And we think that very often it is through qualitative research that actually we innovate in our field, because this is where you can really make some difference, identifying new phenomena, new explanation to those phenomena, sometimes more easily. So definitely I can say that there are around nice journals being open to this. And then there are others who do a little bit of one thing and a little bit of the other. So, but for sure there are others. I agree with you, Ariel, that actually are not so much open to qualitative research. I would say that some US based accounting journals, they tend not to publish qualitative research at all. So, and we need to recognize this. And yeah, probably there is no sense in sending them papers to them if they are qualitative. I hope this helps.
Thank you so much for the answer, Ileana. And I agree with your position too. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I will give the floor to Fabrício to ask the question. Go on, Fabrício.
Thanks, André. Ileana, glad to see you again. I have read that the goal of most qualitative studies is not to generalize, but rather to provide a rich, contextualized understanding of some aspect of human experience. In your paper, it is said that readers need to understand the research study site and the context to compare to place they already know. So if I understood correctly, the more similar the research study setting is to the readers on settings, the more plausible and defendable the research findings and generalizations come from them. How can we build it working in so diverse contexts? Because if I'm just want to speak to an international audience, and I have to bring, for example, the Brazilian context to them, how can I generalize? I thought it's a challenge of generalization from my side. Thanks.
Yeah, you raise a very important point. Let me say that I really think that actually many people are afraid of looking for generalization. And it is true that sometimes this is not necessarily our aim. For example, if we discover a very peculiar case, a very extreme case, sometimes we want to understand better that case. But then again, if you think about this, even in the case where we go for a very extreme case, paradoxically, that extremeness, what is this? So an extreme case, for example, let's suppose, you know, that I work a lot into local government. And then an extreme case can be a very poor local government, where being extreme means being really a local government with not so many resources, with very difficult situations, and so on and so forth. And then we could say, oh, that's unique. But then it could be unique as a case because it has a number of specificities. But then in a way, the beauty of research is that sometimes you write that story about that sad local government. I don't know why I picked this sad story. But then actually there is someone else, somewhere else in the world, and they will come to you and say, listen, you have written about this. And then, you know, I know cases in this completely different country where actually people face the same difficulties. And what you describe there are the same difficulties. And then by describing this there, and perhaps describing how people face this, how they felt about this, or how they manage through this, then we are learning something that also makes sense to us practically. And this could be more a kind of practical generalization, or also theoretically. That is, for example, by looking at that extreme case, we identified that in an extreme case like this, there could be some types of reactions which are really typical. And then actually they can be also similar in other cases, so that we can even build a theory about reactions to very extreme situations. And then in another paper, someone else could look at another kind of extreme case, it's a very good one, and comparing the literature in this case, as we were saying before, engaging more with the literature, comparing those cases which are differently extreme, we can then even have the possibility to generalize by contrasting them. So the point is then having this opportunity of sometimes building generalizations through looking at the whole literature around something, for example. But again, sometimes we in a way, we downplay the possibilities that we have to say something that is really interesting for others. And I think the point is always about understanding that many things that have to do with the context and the specific features of a case have to do with some concept which is theoretically relevant. So being a poor local government means, for example, having a high financial vulnerability. And this is something that theoretically becomes relevant. And then it's something that can abstract from a specific case and be exported somewhere else. So I really think, well, Brazil, I think there is so much potential to tell things that are of relevance to the rest of the world from many, many perspectives. We have been discussing this many times, of course, with my friends, the various Andres that I know, Andre Aquino, Andre Lino. And it's wonderful actually to see how Brazil is similar, for example, to certain countries, and well, and provides also a combination of features that you can find in different realities. It's considered a very strong emerging country, So sometimes people feel, oh, it should be compared then with China or India. But then from other aspects, culturally, it could be compared with, let's say, countries which are more in Europe, because there is some kind of cultural roots there. And I think we also did some kind of special issues on this, I think, right? Right. And then, of course, it has also a Napoleonic tradition from certain perspectives. And then this brings back to comparing with France or Italy, but also with former French colonies, for example. So I think the point is, you know, you can look at Brazil from many angles, and you can find many things that Brazil has in common with other countries. And then there are other aspects which are unique about Brazil. And then actually, I think many people around the world want really to understand more about Brazil per se. So we shouldn't be shy about being proud, actually, of being from a country which has a lot of richness and a lot also to teach to others. So, you know, can I confess you one thing? As a reviewer, I tend to ask for explanation for why a certain paper coming from the US should be published, because this is what I have seen all of my life. People writing papers about the US or the UK and not being asked why. And then I have seen all of my life people coming from India, Brazil, France, Italy, Spain, China, to have to justify why their country is relevant.
This is the big question.
I will not add anything.
Okay, thank you, Ileana. Fabrizio, any more points?
No, just to thank. I was just thinking really about this, because every time we try to read some international journal, we have to explain why the Brazil matters in the academic field. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we are approaching the end of the session now. I just want to know if anyone else has any comment or any question that you would like to make. Probably we still have some minutes, Ileana, for maybe a final question, if someone has something to ask. Andrea Aquino raised their hands.
I would have one, but I don't know if I have time.
Okay, I know your questions, Andre.
No, it's just a simple one, I think. I don't have the answer, but the number of theories is increasing a lot. And I think there is an opportunity to cross fields research or cross areas research. For instance, the literature on accountability is huge, diverse, a big literature. And we have an individual accountability, social accountability, digital accountability, and we can, for some phenomena, we could combine individual accountability, literature from political science, with the increasing of interaction on social media to see whether people react to recording or live streaming. I'm talking about a paper that I'm developing. But my point is how the qualitative research nowadays and reviewers are open to cross areas theorizing initiatives.
That's another wonderful question. I would say that it's up to us. I think we need to realize that when we receive an invitation to review a paper, this is not only, well, one more thing to do in our to-do list. This is also an important way in which we can make a difference in our communities. I know it sounds like, but yes, that's it. Because actually, by being reviewers of papers and by being constructive and open reviewers, rather than trying to kill anybody sending any papers, we can make that difference. Think about this. If we were all open, well, of course, open provided that people are serious in their papers, people are honest in their papers, people are consistent in their papers, but then also give people a chance to explain, for example. Give people a chance to improve their papers, building this dialogue with authors rather than killing them. I think this would be, well, in its simplicity, this would completely change the game. But the game right now is really different. People play this kind of game in thinking, okay, well, have you seen the description of certain journals? The first thing they write in their description is how many papers they reject. A few days ago, I was on LinkedIn and I saw how an editor described their roles. And their roles was about rejecting papers. I was like, there was no reference to their role as supporting the development of the community and the field. Their role was about making decisions of acceptance and rejection. And then there was like 5, 6, or 7 lines about how many papers they reject. You didn't even get an idea about what their journal is or is about. I was shocked. So the point is, are we ready to go and try to change the game? Are we ready to make our expectations clear as authors, but also try to then follow this as reviewers? So every time a nice reviewer does not accept an opportunity to review a paper, is a lost opportunity. And then if we just say, oh, this paper should be rejected, that's it, I don't like it. Or this paper is not convincing. What does this mean? It means nothing. If you are a reviewer and you want to change the game and improve the quality of the research we do in our field, you need to play a collaborative game. It's not by killing others that you publish more. No, it's by being collaborative and trying to help others by saying, listen, now this paper is not so strong, okay, but you know, if you try to think, when we review papers, what are we trying to do? Are we saying, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working, or rather saying, listen, this could work if you do this, this, and that. Of course, it's up to you. I'm not trying to decide for you. But probably, if you try to do this, if you move this in this way, if you reflected on this, then this could be different. So I think the point is really the way in which we try to be constructive in the community, but also try to make sure that others feel that they should be doing the same. And I'm sure that in this community here today, this is exactly what we all do, but we need to make sure that others also do the same. So we need to, in a way, continue this process through which we try to make our community stronger and stronger by being, well, dialogical and open rather than killing each other. I don't know if it makes sense anyway.
Yes, for me, yes, Ileana. And they call themselves of gatekeepers, don't they? The gatekeepers, trying to keep us out, or not us, but those that are trying to publish there. Not
Yeah.
bridge constructors, but gatekeepers. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we are now going to the end, right? Ileana, do you have time for a last question from me?
Yeah, yeah, of
Okay.
course.
I want to talk a little bit about academic docility. I can hear on the voices on the paper that's some of them, they raise some critiques about the status quo, about the way that things are going. Maybe specifically about the methodology that is more ceremonial, or the engagement with the theoretical literature that is also not so in depth. So they're raising critiques. But by the end of the day, to get published, as André said, the gatekeepers, by the end of the day, probably those people are conforming to the game as the game is played. And this relates to the academic docility point that you make in the end of the paper, right? So given that you interviewed early career researchers, and there is, of course, power imbalance between those early career researchers and the ones that are editors and everything, how to change this game given the power imbalance and given basically this scenario?
Well, first of all, keep this in mind. Okay, some of you maybe at the beginning of their career or mid-career. Okay, so keep this in mind. In 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, you may be in those positions, right? As editors, as gatekeepers. So are you planning to do the same? Because sometimes it's easy to complain, right? When you are in a not so strong position, but then when you get there, are you ready then to try to change the rules of the game, or are you just trying to comply? Okay, so I think this is something, well, in 20 years' time, in 10 years' time, let's meet again and see what happened and whether basically you remember this when you get in those positions. And I hope that you will remember this and try to change things a little bit. On the other hand, but I would say that there are two ways of surviving. Well, there are different ways of surviving in academia, but I really think, well, I can think one is to be strong, okay? To really work on ourselves, to really make sure that our research is strong, that our research gives a real contribution, and then to build around us a community of people who can be our friends, but can also support us because they are strong people, good people, those people who can tell you, listen, this paper is not strong enough, but I can give you advice on how to improve it. And basically, the point is, when you embrace a situation like this, you work a lot on being stronger and stronger. This means working a lot, this means reading a lot, this means going to conferences, getting known, and being ready to confrontation, being ready to continuously trying to improve your work. And this is one way. The other way is saying, listen, why going through this trouble? I can just become part of some club. I will try to get the protection of someone by doing what they want me to do. I give up on my independence and I do what needs to be done just to get those things published. That's it. Okay, so I'm not trying to say that one thing is better than the other. It's just people may prefer different things. Okay, so if you go for the first approach, a lot of work is involved, but there can be really satisfaction when you then realize that you have a strong paper, you have a good paper, and then that paper, one way or the other, will end up being recognized, being cited, being published, okay? Because then in the end, if you do good work, it gets recognition, okay? Gatekeepers can do whatever they want, but then you will manage through, because not everyone is a gatekeeper, okay? Just for an example. The other approach, okay, can work anyway. So you say, listen, I try to be in the right club and whatever, but then, you know, you will be completely dependent on others. You will have to give up on your independence. You will have to give up on your autonomy. And then if somebody decides that you are no longer part of the club, that's it. And you don't have the strong research. Probably you are not even following your passion. So, but of course, this is my view. It's completely biased by my experience. I had to decide at some point of my career. I could have decided to go completely quantitative and do the kind of research others wanted me to do. And I decided, no, I want to do what I like, and I want to make sure that I can stand on my legs in doing this. It was not necessarily always easy, but I met many, many good people who really supported me in my path in doing this. One of them is Andre, by the way.
Okay, thank you very much, Ileana. There are some congratulations messages on the chat that you can probably see. And yeah, I think I will hand over to Andrea Aquino just to finish. Okay, Andrea, go.
Yes, well, thank you, Ileana, to launch this initiative by our research group. It was a real amazing honor to have you here to launching this initiative with us. And we expect to have other leading scholars here. And I think we have some luck to cross your way or to meet you in Bocconi some years ago and having the opportunity to learn with you. And now Lino is your colleague there in Essex. Thank you for following our group and to support us during this time. Thank you so much, and we hope we can share many other opportunities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Really, it was a wonderful opportunity, and I wish you all the best with your research. And I really look forward to perhaps meeting you at some future conference or events, or to hearing more about your own research. Next time, it's about all of you.